Go.
And we're back. And today we're going to be talking about serial killers. Although this is something I do at the con pretty often, I always try to do a different serial killer. So if you see this ever on the list, know that it's not going to be the one you've already attended, because there's so many that I like doing new ones. So this is actually the 5th version of this I've done, different serial killers each time. So I just want to give a warning with this. This panel does contain graphic descriptions. It does contain some photographs, not nearly as many photographs. Usually I have a lot more graphic stuff, but since this is something being done virtually, we knew that we wouldn't be able to really check the audience age and stuff. So not quite as graphic as usual, but it's still something that can be upsetting because I am going to be describing some fairly interesting things. Also, some of the content may be considered offensive. So if you are easily upset, don't do it. If you have a cute little one, don't let them watch or listen. You don't want them being corrupted. And just so you know, I have acquired the assets. But I want to give you a fair warning. This year I included something that's frightening that I have never really included before: statistics. So I apologize in advance. You can run if you want. The stats are still going to be there because they're still going to be true. So here's a question, and Zach, I apologize. Once again, I like getting the audience active, so usually this is a back and forth. So with people, why do they think motivates serial killers? What do you think motivates a serial killer to do what they do? What would drive someone to kill numerous other people?
I mean, I feel like it's kind of a person-by-person basis, maybe subjective, but I don't know. I guess maybe a traumatic event in their upbringing. They talked poorly about the Final Fantasy series. Just saying things off the top of my head. No, but in all seriousness, I guess we have something to do with things that happened in their childhood. Would be my guess. Then we can wait to see. Wait to see what everybody else says. Oh, hi, Karen. Karen just joined in. Let's see what we got. And a lot of people, let me tell you, were asking for this panel. So I'm really glad we ended up getting it together.
I'm really glad, because the first year I tried presenting this panel to a convention, they looked at me like I was crazy. So knowing that people are interested makes me happy.
Gosh. Even when we were still having the physical Visioncon, people were asking for it. So I know my girlfriend was, that's for sure. All right, so the delay might be hooking them up, but let's go forward just in case.
Okay. So some of the things that actually motivate serial killers, if we're going by statistics, this is actually done with information through Radford University. This is all actual factual. If we're looking at the main reason serial killers do what they do, it's enjoyment. It is that simple. They like doing what they do. So we can try to wrap our minds around it. We can try to justify it, but for them, it's something that they enjoy. You know, I like going out and playing video games. I like watching Labyrinth for the 1000th time. But with them, maybe it's dismembering a human body, you know. Other people, it's for financial gain. Last year, we talked about a serial killer who was pretty good with this, the acid bath killer. Financial gain was his main motivation. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's multiple. Now, if you go further down the list, you'll notice that one of the things that's lower on there is attention. It's not usually about getting attention. Why? Because serial killers don't want to necessarily be caught. They may like the attention it garners. They may like the fear that it creates. But that goes back to enjoyment a lot of the time. So one of the things I always try to do is find a new serial killer quote or some quote about them. So why are you in this room? Usually I'm asking people that. I always have at least one person in the audience who says that they're taking notes, which is terrifying. So if you ever see someone who's watching serial killers because of that, take their picture, take their information, and send it out to all your friends, because then if you go missing, they know who to look for. But here's actually a quote from Albert Fish. I always had the desire to inflict pain on others and to have others inflict pain on me. I always seem to enjoy everything that hurts. The desire to inflict pain, that is all that is uppermost. So it's kind of interesting, because the reason I do these quotes is because oftentimes there's nothing that I can find to relate to with that. There's something just completely out of the norm that I just can't wrap my head around. And I think that's really the reason a lot of us are interested in serial killers. We're interested in it because it's something that is so departed from everything we know and understand that we have to pay attention to it. We want to know because we want to find some kind of explanation. And if we can find an explanation, if we can find some logic, then we can figure out how to address it, and then we're safe. But that's not necessarily the case. So here are some killer stats. And these are things that I kind of use to tell people the truth, but it also kind of scares them. So I may not necessarily ask for this. I'm going to just answer these for you. But mentally think about this. The US has what percentage of the world's serial killers? So the US, out of the entire world, what percentage of serial killers do you think we have? From that, if we're talking within the US, how do you think that Missouri ranks in the number of deaths due to serial killers? So do we have the highest? Do we have the lowest? Where are we at? And if we're thinking about serial killers, what are their preferred modes of killing? So what are the preferred modes of murder? So
in order, I hope 1%, Missouri's on the bottom of the list, and preferred modes of murder are waiting, and they'll just die of old age.
No.
Right with any of them.
That would be better, but it's actually far more frightening than that.
Dang.
So here's actually the truth, and it's actually going to be fun because I get to watch your reaction to the answers on this.
Here we go.
The US actually has 67.6% of the serial killers in the entire world. Congratulations, US. We're number one. So, yay, patriotism.
Yay.
Number two on here, the Missouri and the number of deaths due to serial killers, we actually rank 12th out of 50.
No.
So we're actually pretty high on this. And preferred modes of murder, guns, which are everywhere. Strangulation, everyone has hands, at least most people do. And then stabbing.
No, those hurt.
Those are all things that are pretty easy to come by. And something that I always try pointing out is right now this is virtual. And I would say this if we were at a convention, because if you're at a convention, things to consider is you're away for a weekend. No one's expecting you back until probably Monday. And no one thinks anything if you don't answer your phone. You're surrounded by strangers. If one person goes missing, hardly anyone's going to notice. So convention's kind of scary in that right. But right now, think about it from being home. You're at home. You're not going out. People aren't going to notice that you're missing as much, especially if you're an introvert. So something to consider, just a little bit scary. Because if we're thinking about Missouri being 12th, I'm not telling you to panic. I would never say that. But it's just kind of one of those things that makes you stop and think for a second. So I told you, the stats are the scariest part of this. And today I did something different. Usually with a serial killer panel, I do several different killers and I kind of do it in sections. Berkowitz is one that you guys have asked me for a very long time. And the more I got into Berkowitz, the deeper and deeper that rabbit hole got until he became the entire panel. So I hope you guys don't mind. So today we're going to be talking about Son of Sam. And this is one where I really did go deep in the rabbit hole. So with David Berkowitz, his mother, as far as birth mother, was Elizabeth Broder. There were some problems though with Daddy. See, he was a married man and she was with him, but of course you can't have that together. And she wanted to originally keep David, but he essentially told her that if she kept David, he would leave her. So who did she choose? Her child or the man? She chose the man and gave him up for adoption. His adopted parents were Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz, so they took him in. But while they were doing that, there were some concerns if we're going through his history that start to arise. So even though he's wanted by these people, he's adopted by them, it's not the best childhood. So some concerns is, first of all, he missed 46 days of kindergarten. There's no necessary reason given. I'm sure that someone knows that reason. I don't. But missing that much school at any point is concerning because the person's not able to keep up, they're not able to learn, but it also raises potential concerns about what's going on behind the scenes. Some other things is whenever he was a child, some girls were actually picking on him and they put sand on his head and he was getting bullied. The reaction that his family had to that was actually his mother slapped him for it. And whenever he was still very young, I think he was about 5 years old, there were some concerns with a shower. With this, his mother actually made him shower with her in front of a bunch of other women. So he doesn't have this idea of being, having his own safe place. He wasn't comfortable with that necessarily. But something else that happens during this time is while he's in this scenario, and a man actually walked in and he got to hear the women shriek, he got to hear them scream. So that gives him the idea that men are powerful over women and they can have them actually react in different ways. Something that's very powerful for a child to see. Now, I'm not saying don't scream if a man walks in while you're trying to shower. That's fine. You do it if you want. Zach can even do it if he wants. But I'm saying for David, that was actually kind of a turning point because it's something that actually made him think about that. Now, I don't have a picture on this slide because I couldn't really find any other pictures of child David Berkowitz. There's just not enough. But some other issues we had at school, he was a bully. He would pick on other kids. The teachers actually made comments about how he was bigger than the other kids. He didn't seem to have any friends. He was constantly instigating. Another thing that started happening during that time was he was stealing. And that's something else that's pretty powerful as we're looking at indications of later issues with someone. He also ended up having a fair bit of head trauma. So he was in a car accident, ended up greatly impacting his head. And he also later on somehow had an impact with the wall while he was out and about within that same year, I believe, that led to problems with that. Now, something that's interesting with this is potential head trauma, which I know if we're looking at someone who's developing, head trauma can create a lot of issues. And then there was some 7-year-old discoveries. So there's just some issues he has. At the age of 7 years old, his parents told him that he was adopted. So we have someone who already has these issues, already has problems, and then at the age of 7, without any kind of idea before that, he finds out that he was adopted. That created a lot of issues for David because he'd never had that before. He thought that he was theirs, and then he finds out that he is, but he's also someone else's who didn't want him. And another thing is that he actually witnessed a fair number of deaths as a child. He witnessed a boy who died, I think, off the side of a bus, and he witnessed a woman and her daughter who were killed in a car accident. All this happened in front of him. There is no indications that anything was done other than moving on. So we don't think that he had any counseling. We don't think anything really happened with that. So that can definitely have an impact on a child. And with this, what are some concerns that you think would be coming up for his mental health so far? Now, this is a question for the audience. So if we're talking about David Berkowitz, I've told you some of the things happening to him very young during his formative years. What are some things that you think are going to come up that are going to be issues? As far as what would you worry about? Would you worry about the fact that his mom's making him shower in front of women? Would you worry about the fact that he's getting slapped for being bullied? Tea. It fuels my fans as far as my fandom. I don't know if I actually have any fans. I feel sorry for anyone if they are. I'm weird. Zach left. Okay, so I'm not hearing any answers. I hope you guys can still.
I am so sorry. Did I miss something? I was grabbing something upstairs.
Oh, I was just asking if anyone knew what some of the mental health concerns would be. Sorry, I can't.
Oh, you're fine. Okay, what are some of the concerns for mental health? Ooh,
that question's been up for a bit, so if no one's answered, I can just move on.
Yeah, no one's answered so far, so let's move on now.
So some other things that happened while you were still young, Zach, you can take a break if you need. Sorry. So some other things that happened while he was still young is he started setting fires. He actually set hundreds of fires as a child, and he kept a diary. He also committed birdicide. He killed his mother's bird, Pudgy, which is the cockatiel. He did this over a series of weeks with cleaning fluid. Now, granted, this is not the bird. This is simply a picture of a dead bird because, once again, you can't find those pictures. But it's something that's kind of interesting because if we're looking at indications of later potential serial killers or acting out behavior, cruelty to animals is one of those. Killing animals is certainly one of those. Another thing is he would kill bugs. He would do it with glue. He would do other things. But his obsession at that point was kill things because he had control over them, and that gave him that power. Something else that also happened while he was still young, he was a young teenager at the time, was his mother died. And after that, even though he'd already struggled with school, with attendance, his grades dropped. So he went from being like an AB student to more like C's and F's. And 3 years later, his father remarried, and his new stepmother had a daughter who was, I believe, in her 20s, and he wasn't too happy about that. So at the age of 17, some sources said 18, but 17 seems more accurate from what I was able to find, he joins the Army. He passes their psychological tests, he passes the physical tests, so he joins up. During that time, he becomes a pretty good marksman, and that's something that's going to come up later on if you know anything about David Berkowitz. He also served in South Korea. He ended up earning an honorable discharge, and after he was discharged, he ended up contacting his birth mother. This led to a problem because while it gave him that connection to her, he then found out how come she gave him up for adoption. So he finds this woman he doesn't have the best relationship with, but he tries to form this relationship, and then he finds out that she gave him up because of a man. And that leads to rejection from her, and then also leads to him feeling that rejection from that father figure who he'd never even met, because he has no explanation for that. So that leads to a lot of problems for him. So after that, he ended up fading contact with her. He ended up stopping talking to his half-sister, that was her daughter. But that leads to a lot of issues with his personal identity, his personal relationships, his attachment. He doesn't really have any of that. So he starts working. And the reason I think that these jobs are interesting is because these are all ones that say a lot about potential access to people. So he worked as a cab driver for a while. Lots of people getting out of cabs. He worked as a security guard for a while. So his job was to protect and keep people safe and keep things safe. Well, not so much when we were a serial killer later on. He worked for the U.S. Postal Service. So literally going postal. Now, this is a question for the audience as far as this. I'm going to go back to the other slide in a second. So does anyone remember a serial killer that I previously presented about who had a relationship with the post office? This is one of, well, actually my absolute favorite serial killer. So does anyone remember a serial killer with a relationship to the post office? And do you remember how they were related?
I will take a wild stab. How they were related, how that serial killer was related to this one?
No, just the serial killer who was related to the post office.
Oh, related to the
one I presented on before. Your girlfriend might actually know this one.
I want to say, I'm going to take a wild stab while we wait for people to comment in. Is it, let's go with Ted Bundy.
Nope.
Dang it.
That would be scary though. But you had a serial killer. I'm proud of you.
I did know a serial killer. Writing.
I don't know that there's actually very many comments happening at all.
They were related to.
Broke them.
Well, I'm worried that. Are they showing up on yours? Because I'm worried.
I'm not seeing anything on mine at all.
Yeah. The last one was from Roberta. Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we were still. That there were no tech difficulties, but no, I don't think so. Okay. I say we go for it.
So it was actually H.H. Holmes.
Oh.
He was one of the original serial killers, and what was interesting about him is he amassed a ridiculous amount of fortune, and what did he do? He didn't go the way of Bruce Wayne to save the city. No, he created a murder house where he had different things that happened, where he could actually have walls that were in the middle of nowhere, doors that led to nothing, rooms that were actually rooms where you would suffocate. There were a lot of things in there. It was all designed to kill people. And after he was arrested, what happened? The government decided to make good use of the property, and they made it a post office, because that's what you do with a murder house.
Naturally.
Yeah. So, sorry, H.H. Holmes, just had to give a shout out to him. So, back to David Berkowitz, the subject of the day. So, his fire starting whenever he returned, even while he's working, still only continues and continues to grow. He actually kept a very detailed set of journals, not just one, but several that he put together. And there are over 1,400, some reports say over even 1,500 reported fire starting incidences that he had. Now, I'm not sure how he did all that without anyone noticing, but that's something that happened. His contact with his mother also led to something different. He also found out that his name wasn't his name. He found out that it was something else. And I'll tell you guys that later if you want. But the reason for the abandonment, finding out why his dad had fought his mom as far as, I got a life, I've got a family, you can't keep him. If you keep him, I'm gone. That led to a lot of issues for him. But during this time, he also starts reporting some voices. He starts reporting that he's hearing these voices that are telling him to kill, telling him to hurt people. And he believes that there's this demon and he has to get away from it. So he actually moves to avoid. So he thinks that by moving, he's going to be safe. So per his report, his move actually ends up not being before that, after this. So his first attack rather. Sorry, I'm getting a little brain fried after doing so many panels in a row. So his first attack happened on Christmas Eve. Yay, Christmas! Back in 1975. He attacked 15-year-old Michelle Foreman and Jane Doe. The reason why I say Jane Doe is because the other victim has not been identified. We don't know who she is. So he actually attacks them with a knife. They both survive. Now, what's interesting about this is it does not fit the pattern for his later behaviors, his later fights. We don't see anything as far as guns. We don't see any actual success, but it gives him an idea of what it's like to attack someone. Now, he does move to try to get away from the demons, and he actually moves to Yonkers, New York. So he breaks this 2-year lease that he had for only a few months, moves into an apartment, thinking that if I can get away from the demons, I'll be fine. And if you know anything about Yonkers, New York, something I think is hilarious about this for musical fans is think of Hello Dolly. Just makes me laugh. So if we're going into the murders of David Berkowitz, as far as things go, his first murder actually happened 218 days later. The reason why you're going to see that time gap on the bottom of that screen is because it's kind of interesting to look at serial killers and see what their cool-off period is, to see how long they had between attacks, because usually that starts to get shorter and shorter and shorter, and we'll see that's something that happens with him too. Sorry, my throat's getting a little dry. So he sees these two women, Donna and Gloria, who's 18, and Jody Valenti. They were leaving their car. Whenever he sees them leaving the car, he actually approaches them, gets down into a shooting stance, uses one of his knees, rests one of his arms on it, holds up with the other, and starts shooting. He fired 5 shots from a .44 Bulldog. After that, and it was reported by eyewitnesses that they saw a yellow car leaving the scene. Now, what's kind of interesting is think about it. It's New York. It's during the 70s. And something that you probably didn't know is this also happened in an Italian neighborhood. So originally the police were kind of dismissive of this, thinking that it was a hit gone wrong. They thought that someone just had the wrong person and they were trying to kill them. So originally the police hadn't put nearly as much work into this. So 86 days later, on October 23rd, 1976, we have Berkowitz, who sees these two people, Rosemary Keenan and Carl Niro, both of who survived, sitting in Niro's car. He fired 5 shots at them. Now, Niro gets shot in the head, he drives away, and that's pretty much the thing that saves him. But he ends up with a metal plate in his head. So with all this, while they're driving away, they don't even necessarily realize all that's happened. But something else that happens too is we find and the police evidence is able to find a .44 caliber found in the vehicle. But they can't do a ballistics test to try to, not ballistics, they can't do anything to try to match the bullets because the ones in the car are so mangled that there's nothing to really try to match them to. So we're not going to necessarily be able to have that cool forensics that we're used to hearing about. So something that's kind of curious just to ask the audience is, I already gave the answer, sorry. Why did the police not begin piecing together the 2 shootings that might be related? Well, the answer is kind of depressing. They happened in different precincts. So even though this was all happening in New York, one police department was not communicating with another, and that's something that was happening pretty frequently. So even though they were very similar attacks, pretty close together, the police didn't even know about it because they were so close by. So why was it later believed that Berkowitz shot at Niro? Long hair. Niro had long hair, so the theory was that he thought it was 2 women in the vehicle and was trying to shoot them. So, don't have long hair, I guess.
Well, dang it.
No, you're in trouble. I'm sorry.
Dang it.
Hey, luscious locks are worth the danger, right?
I personally think so, but you know.
But that's something that happened with that. Then 35 days later, if you're noticing, the time gap is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. On November 27th, 1976, Anna DeMasi, who's 16, and Joan Lamino, probably said that last name wrong, were shot at. What happened with them is they were outside of one of their houses. They were still talking, and Berkowitz approached them and he began talking to them. He was actually originally asking for directions, but before he could even finish his questions, he started firing at them. He fired 5 shots. Once again, during this time, a lot of the shots hitting them, but also a lot of shots hitting the house. Shots hitting the house, bullets can't necessarily help us find out very much. But the problem with this is we also get some eyewitness testimony of the shooter. So with this, we're getting some descriptions of what he looks like, but not necessarily the accurate descriptions. So with this, we're actually having someone tell the police that they saw a blonde shooter. Now, that doesn't match up with the original description, so we start to see some issues with that. Eyewitness testimony often leads to a lot of issues. Then, 64 days later, Berkowitz's reign of terror continues. On January 30th, 1977, 77 is really the year where he started taking off, there was Christine and John. They were sitting in his vehicle, and they were shot at. Now, with this, they ended up getting drove to the hospital, but it's one of those where Christine didn't make it. So at this point, even though they had these different things happening, the precincts weren't talking, at this point, they finally start communicating. And then they make this idea that these killings, these shootings are related, but we still have this eyewitness testimony over here that says that they saw a blonde man. So what ends up happening is the police come up with this theory that these shootings are connected and there are multiple shooters. So this is going to lead to some issues because these theories kind of impacts how you look for people, how you're going to be trying to catch the killer. So we have a theory finally, we at least know they're connected, but we don't have the right theory quite yet. So police finally connected the crimes, but what did they get wrong? The idea of multiple killers. So they believe there were multiple shooters. Why? Because of that eyewitness testimony. So with this, Berkowitz continues 37 days later, not a very long gap. It usually takes me that long to get to the gym in between each time because I'm entirely too lazy. I don't see how he had this much motivation to do this. So he attacks 19-year-old Virginia. Now, this is different from the other attacks. If you were paying attention and if you're looking at patterns, he's usually attacking people who are in groups of 2. This is the time where he attacks someone who's by themselves. He actually raises a gun and shoots her. Now, one of the things actually says, if you're looking at what happened, is that as she was coming home from school, she was approaching home, she had her books with her, and she actually tried to hold her books in front of her head. It went through the books and killed her. Some of the theory and some of the evidence you find says otherwise, but that seems to be the most reliable. So he kills her with 1 shot directly to the head, which is different because previously he's fired multiple rounds. This time he took the time to aim it and get it right. And this is the .44 caliber bullet that led to a connection. So it's awful she died, but because the bullet hit her, the bullet was able to be saved and actually used for testing. So with this, we finally have some evidence we need to verify that these shootings are related. And this actually leads to a name being assigned to the killer. He becomes known as the .44 caliber killer. And this is something that kind of makes me mad. And this is a rant I've had for years. Why do we give serial killers cool names like that? Why do we give them these awesome names? Acid Bath Killer. If we're going through, I mean, we have the Boston Strangler. I think at one point there was even a Taco Bell killer. That one's not as cool. But seriously, why don't we just call them things like Susan? We might have less killers. So 39 days later, he kills a woman. 39 days later, he's ready to go again. So April 16th, 1977, we have Valentina and Alexander. With this, they were both in their vehicle. They were sitting out in a park, in a park area. This guy sees them and shoots them. He kills them. But what's interesting about this is that while they were sitting together in the car, strong patterns start to emerge, which begins to challenge the idea of multiple killers. So these are too similar. There's too many things going on that are tying close together. So unfortunately, even though it's taking more and more kills for this to happen, they basically end up finding more and more information from each kill. So they're learning. It's great for the police, but it's bad for the public because this is happening. So it's not the best scenario. So what was found at the scene that changed the killer's name? That's a good question for people. So this is one that people usually do know. So there's something that was found at the scene of that kill that ended up leading to him getting a different name. So he had been the 44 caliber killer. He later is known as the Son of Sam. That's how most people know him. Do you have any guess what was found there?
So we've got, while we wait for people to guess, we have Brandon Lawthorne chimed in with, I believe it was regarding what he said about why we give them names. He said, because the media loves an intimate story, which, I mean, undoubtedly is true. And is the reason, and that was the guess I was going to do. Because, I mean,
well, there's another thing, too. If we give it a catchy name, people are going to tune in and watch. So that's a good reason for the media to do that as well.
But then again, kind of perpetuates the cycle of, well, you know, if I want to be famous, you know, if I just kill a bunch of people, I'll be remembered forever.
Scary.
Yeah. Just waiting for people to chime in. A lot of people are probably eating dinner or something and while watching this, so it's probably hard to type while eating.
That's okay. I can just go on if I need to. This one's actually one that a lot of people should know. So if no one's answered, they probably are, but
all right, let's do it.
So the answer is actually a letter. Before he actually killed them, he took the time to pen a letter and leave it at the scene of the crime. So if you're thinking about this, so if you have a letter, it's written by the killer. The police are able to get a hold of this. So what's the dumbest thing the police can do with a piece of evidence to compromise it?
They can grab it with their bare hands.
Ding, ding, ding. Not only one police officer, 8 police officers did that.
Oof.
And that led to that being completely compromised. Now, they were able to find some prints on there that weren't the police officers, but they were only partial prints. But there's a chance that had that not happened, there would have been better prints for them to try to go off of. So improper handling of evidence led to a lot of issues with this that could have actually cost a lot of lives. And if you're curious about these letters, these are actually some of them. The one that's underneath is actually the first letter. And it's talking about how he's very upset and deeply hurt that people are calling him a woman hater. But with this, he says, I am the son of Sam. And you can see that in quotes. So that's something where the media then changed his name. So Berkowitz holds the honor of being a serial killer who actually managed to get to name himself, which is something that's kind of interesting. And that second letter you see there is something he sent to someone from I can't remember the name of the person, but they were a journalist just a few days later. So that ended up in a lot of things. So it's kind of interesting to be able to find this evidence because you're able to find what the killer was actually leaving. You're actually to be able to see what he wrote. And you can look these letters up online. There's nothing that's unable to be found on that. So I would recommend giving them a read if you're curious. So 71 days later, he ended up having a slightly longer reign in between. This is probably because he ended up being able to have the extra media attention, the extra things from that. But on June 26, 1977, we have Judy and Sal, who are shot in their car. They're hit multiple times, but this time there was something that was very different from previously. At this place they were in their vehicle, and there was a couple that was in a different vehicle who had been parked there originally. They saw a man under a light lamp who they viewed as suspicious. So they actually moved where their vehicle was, but they were still able to kind of see what was going on. Turns out they were right. The man under the lamp was, in fact, the son of Sam. He ended up finding Judy and Sal in their vehicle. He shot them multiple times. Now, with this, They survived. They were lucky. But one of the benefits of this is now we have an accurate description. We have people who were able to see the son of Sam leaving. They were able to describe what he looked like, around his height, and they were able to see what he was leaving for. But it's still not quite enough. We now have a better description of him, so we know better person to look for. We're able to get better police sketches at this time. But 35 days later, on July 31st, 1977, Stacy and Robert were shot in a car. Now, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. This is the one where it was under the lamp. Sorry, too many murders in this head. But with this, once again, better description. Better descriptions we get, the more accurate we can look for. Now, if you're kind of curious why it was always said that he terrorized New York, here's a map of what was going on at the time. So all these are fairly closely related to each other. You can see how kind of dense they are. So these are the boroughs that he was attacking. This is what was going on. So you can actually see the dates, you can see the locations. Some of them were very close to one another. Some of them were even overlapping. You can even see where he was later captured outside of his apartment. Now, during this time, while he's still doing all these killings, while he's still on the loose, his behaviors actually start happening in other ways too. He starts acting out in ways towards his neighbors. So if you've ever heard of the demonic dog that ended up telling him to do these killings, meet Harvey, the black lab. Now, he listened to Harvey. He said that the dog told him to do these things. He also said that Sam Carr, Harvey's owner, was a demon as well. Now, he apparently attempted to kill Harvey with a Molotov cocktail. Also, he wrote disturbing letters to his neighbors. He ended up sending cards of condolences regarding accidents that never happened under other people's names. There's a lot of strange, erratic behaviors that don't really make sense. Something else that later happened was Harvey got shot. Gee, I wonder who would have had motivation to shoot Harvey. Now, this is something that I just want people to do. You don't have to chime in for it, but this is something that I just think is important, because this poor dog has faced a lot of discrimination, a lot of issues, all because of what's been said about this. So look at that dog. Look at him. He's a good boy. He never did anything. He's a sweet boy. You make sure that you tell him he's a good boy, because that poor dog lived through hell, all because someone wanted to try to go for a not guilty by reason of insanity plea as an option.
Harvey, you're a good boy.
Thank you. Sorry. I think it's just important that people know that poor dog was a good boy, and people don't usually know much about the dog. So this is a fun piece of evidence, and what's interesting about it is I found this on Google within seconds. So I didn't have to look very hard for this at all. This is actually a ticket that ended up leading to Berkowitz arrest. What happened was a woman was out walking her dog and saw Berkowitz getting into a car after a shooting. And she didn't necessarily get the plate, but she did remember that it had a ticket on it. And that's what led to the police being able to find him. So what I love about this is the dog got revenge. It may not have been Harvey, but another dog, because he had to go for a walk, ended up making sure that we were all safer. Because if that walk hadn't happened, if that dog hadn't had to go out, you never would have known this. So since the police knew that there was a ticket on the car, they were able to go through, figure out what tickets had been given out. And that's where we got this. So with this, they got all of his information. Now, whenever the police went to go arrest Berkowitz, he did not resist. He actually confessed in less than an hour. And one of the claims actually said that he basically asked the police, what took you so long, whenever it came time for his arrest. So the thing that's frightening about this, though, he quickly confesses. He's admitting all this, but then he starts telling people that he's not the only son of Sam. This only leads to more public fear, because even though he can't go out and commit these murders and do these things himself anymore, he's still able to manipulate people, because now they have this fear that maybe he's not the only one. Maybe there's still something going on. And here's just some things you can find in his apartment. These are kind of what it looks like. It's very disheveled. It's not well kept. You can actually see the erratic writings on the wall and holes in the wall, things that just aren't normal to have. And out here, you can actually see people pointing and looking at the apartment. So what the city actually did that's interesting is the arrest of Berkowitz became so well known, so well publicized, that they ended up changing the names of the street and stuff to try to keep down tourism regarding this. So I think they might have changed the name to apartment too. I have to look that part up. So now we have the arrest of Berkowitz. He actually decided not to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, which to his credit actually makes sense. Because if you know anything about pleading NGRI, someone who does that can end up spending years in an institution because they're not sane. Well, with that, if they ever become sane, then they're fit to stand trial and then can be sentenced to whatever terms they might have had. So actually, pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, if you have any reason to think that you might ever get out, probably not the best thing because you're only going to spend more time in there. He is currently serving 6 consecutive life terms. One of the reasons he was able to do this, he actually pled and had a plea bargain where if he pled guilty, he would have the potential for later parole. And later on, even though he had said all these wild claims about Harvey and Sam Carr and saying that he was being controlled by demons, he heard these terrible things, he later admitted that was all a hoax. It was just to be able to get a rise and to try to throw people off. Now we have a completely different Berkowitz. So he's an interesting serial killer because he's still alive. So now he's actually a born-again Christian. He's published. He is now self-titled the Son of Hope, the Son of Sam, the Son of Hope. He's very active with other inmates as well. He helps those that are, and he has done a lot of things in the prison. He helps those who are visually impaired. He assists with chaplaincy. He's actually counseled other inmates. He even earned an associate's in business administration. So a lot of changes in that respect. And this is something actually taken from one of his parole hearings. Once again, all things you can find online. So something that he actually wrote in there, as well, said in there, was when talking about his crimes and if he felt he deserved parole. He said, well, I feel that the crimes were so serious and the damage so severe and so many people, I'm sure, are still hurting and grieving that realistically, something like parole in my situation would be very unusual. I wish things were different, but I'm just being realistic. Reality sometimes can be painful, but I have to deal with what it is, you know? So that's something he said back in May 17th of 2016. He's eligible for parole every 24 months. So with that, he went again in 2018 and was denied. Guess what that means is happening next month? Berkowitz is up for parole again. So we don't know how that'll go. Sometimes he shows up for the hearings, sometimes he doesn't. You can actually find where he has an entire transcript of one of those on there. So I'm actually going to pull that up real quick if I can get my screen to share that, because I thought that was kind of interesting as well. So this was actually downloaded from one of his websites, and you can see all the transcripts from this. So you can actually read his comments, you can read the comments of the people who were questioning him, and it gives you an interesting perspective. So Berkowitz is one of those characters as far as a serial killer that's dynamic in that we have a lot more information about him. This was all easily found just with quick internet searches. So you have an entire group of people who believe he's this reformed, born-again Christian, going to do great. You have this other group who says he's this terrible person. Now, I'm just presenting you with facts. I'm not going to try making any judgments because I don't need those flame wars. I'm just a simple presenter. But I just think this is all interesting to share. So that's all that I have about David Berkowitz. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Because this is one you guys asked for a long time.
It's a lot. Like, I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of it. I mean, it kind of, your presentation kind of led kind of like a movie. Like, I feel like you just kind of took me step by step into this man's life and just kind of the sequential events that led to, you know, ultimately the end thing where he's in prison. Is it, so he pled for insanity and got it, so that's why he's not dead, correct?
Yes. Also, he's in a state where that wasn't really something we're going to do.
Oh, that was the other thing. Okay. I guess my biggest question is, what do you think is the biggest contributing factor as to why he did all this?
Well, I think he was just looking for a way to take his hatred out on others. So something that he actually said at one point was that he was looking to hurt the world the way he'd been hurt. And that's something that he successfully did. He terrorized an entire area for around a year. I mean, that's something that's unprecedented. Now, if you notice, those cool-off times were different, but the impact that had was significant. I mean, this led to women cutting their hair, dyeing their hair, because a lot of his victims had long hair and they were brunettes. You have people dyeing their hair blonde. You have people cutting it. You have men cutting their hair because they didn't want to get mistaken for a woman. So,
I was about to say,
I mean, that would be up to you.
That one in particular hits a little close to home. So, do you think that he based any of his actions or how he killed people off any other previous serial killers, or do you think it was all just kind of an original piece by him?
It was really more of an original piece, at least that's kind of what I've seen. Because we have a lot of serial killers that take a lot of pride in using a signature or leaving things behind. I mean, we had the acid bath killer who I've mentioned a few times. His main thing was he readily confessed to crimes because he was so sure he'd gotten rid of all the evidence. Because why not? He actually confessed to the police while sipping tea. But with Berkowitz, I mean, he was a marksman. He was good with that. He had a gun. Might as well use a gun. So that's his. But also, if you think about those original stats that I told you about, murder of choice for serial killers, guns was in that first top 3.
Still blows my mind how high on that list Missouri is. Jamie piped in and said, have you ever watched Mindhunter on Netflix?
I have. And actually, that's a great series. There's also a book, Mindhunter. It's written by the man who founded the forensic behavioral unit with the behavioral science unit with the FBI. And it's all through his lens. So that's something where you actually get to see how that goes. Mindhunter is kind of with that. So it tells you a lot about how behavioral science actually goes. Now, granted, they make it a lot cooler. I wish that it was actually that cool in real life, but me.
All right. Well, I know we're about out of time, so we'll wrap this up. Is there any final thoughts you want to say before we close down day 1 of Virtual Visioncon 2020, Michelle?
Just chime in tomorrow, and I know there's a lot of really good panels. Not that I'm going to shamelessly plug my own. Yeah, I am. Okay, criminal profiling anime. Definitely watch it. But thank you for watching, and thank you for always putting up with me. I appreciate you guys.
Oh, we adore you, and I'm personally really looking forward to the anime one. So, and you want to plug what time that was again?
Oh, you would ask me. I don't know.
Oh, and I would tell you when I exited out of that tab. Oh, so unprofessional. Okay, bear with me, everyone.
I like how we're supposed to be the ones giving you information. We're like, internet.
Hey, I mean, we do the best with what we got, but and they haven't fired me yet, so I think I'm in the clear.
Well, you're in the clear. They need you. They might replace me.
Oh, hardly. No. Don't get me wrong. If they're replacing anyone, it'd be me over you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just gonna put it up on my phone because my computer's acting weird. Probably because I'm making it do a bunch of stuff it's not used to doing.
And by the way, now you get to have a new perspective whenever you're out walking your dog, because who knows, you might be the person to help spot that next serial killer.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to, but I'd like to be alive for the process.
Well, we are number 12, so your chances are higher than a lot of those other states. Just saying.
Yippee. Okay. We've got you at 5 o'clock tomorrow for criminal profiling anime villains.
I'm glad you knew the time. And then on Sunday, I'll be telling children's stories, because that's a complete unrelated subject. So yay, departures.
The trifecta of Michelle Horn. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to close things off with them, so we will see you tomorrow at 5.
See you then. Bye.
Bye.